Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to the brand new Peugeot 408. If you're wondering exactly what this is, it sits very nicely between the Peugeot 308 and the 3008, sitting on the drawing board for the better part of 7 years. I have a feeling that the main reason this car finally got greenlit for production is because, well, a huge amount of the underpinnings of this car are a 308, but it is very distinct and different from that. So what exactly is it? Well, it's part estate, part SUV, part crossover, part fastback. I'm not quite sure. Does any of that add up to a big mess? Or does it actually add up to something quite exciting, new, and maybe the car that you've been looking for? Let's start with the design right at the front. Although this is a brand new design for the 408, you're likely to be seeing this soon on a lot more of Peugeot's real estate. This is what I would call a starburst effect grille. As you can see, all the lines start more or less vertical, but they splay out as you move further away from the center, obviously offset by this massive new Peugeot design badge. You've seen that before, but it's relatively new for the brand. As the front turns into the side, the final feature of the front are these fangs, LED daytime running lights, which are so distinctive on new Peugeot designs. 4 meters 69 or 185 inches. If you're thinking that all of this looks just a little bit familiar, you're probably thinking of the Citroën C5X, which this car shares an awful lot of its DNA with. However, even though the wheelbase is exactly the same, that car is just a little bit longer. One of the challenges of using mixed materials in a car is that you don't have any idea how they're going to age at different rates. And nowhere is that better demonstrated than here. This is the cut through between the side and the rear. And when I look at this car full on at the side, that's what I see. Acres and acres of plastic. Now that looks good on this brand new car, but I have to ask, how is this going to age? This is the GT trim, so it comes with all of the bells and whistles, and that includes the fanciest light array that you can have. A nice little feature up on top here, if we go right to the top, these Peugeot describes as cat ears. I suppose you could say that they're there purely for design reasons, but they certainly do, again, break up the flow of this design. At launch, there are 6 colors available for this car. This one is called Obsession Blue, and together with Graphite Grey, it's one of 2 brand new and exclusive colors just for the 408. Let's start with the key. Nothing to get too excited or too distressed about. It's a pretty standard Peugeot affair, but nice and light. I know it's the new trend to have concealed door handles that pop out when you enter, but you know what? I rather like this old style. It's nice to have something easy and straightforward to grab hold of. You immediately start to get a sense of the build quality, which feels solid enough. If you blindfold yourself and sit in one of these things and take the blindfold off, what you're going to say is, oh, it's a 308, because more or less everything you encounter here is directly lifted. Now, I say neither disappointing nor exciting. I think the 308 design is actually really good. I'm 5'10" or 178 centimeters. This seat is in its lowest position, and as you can see, I have more than enough headroom, which is really nice. Now, if you're not familiar with the 308 layout, let me just walk you through this really quickly. This is the latest generation of the iCockpit. If you haven't heard of it before, it's now in its 10th year. So they've had an awful lot of time to perfect this design and make sure that it works well with drivers. Originally, it was a bit of a problem. The setup is designed that you look over the top of the steering wheel. As you can see, the steering wheel is a very unique design. Now, the first time I ever drove one of these, I just didn't know if I was going to get on with it. But you know what? The more I drove it, the more I liked it. It feels really small, sporty and agile. You can really rip it around when you're actually putting one of these things, by which I mean a Peugeot with this design, through its paces. Here the driver's display is a 3D system, so it's layered effectively. What that means, if you haven't experienced one, is that as you look to the main detail on the screen, it's in the background, but there's a floating layer of information on top of it. Sounds confusing? Trust me, it makes sense when you look at it. The idea behind it is that all the information you don't really need, that's interesting but not necessary for driving, is always there in the background. Anything that's more important is flagged up in the foreground to make it visually very present to you. Slightly over on the right hand side, you have a 10-inch infotainment screen. Now, I'm not entirely convinced about the way in which all of this is put together. It's okay, it's very slick, the screen definition is good, it's high gloss, so it does show up fingerprints quite a lot when it's not in use, but when it is in use, as you can see, the tracking is not bad. It's pretty responsive, and you do have the capacity to change things around so they work more or less in the way in which you want them. We have these I buttons, are they really called that? You can modify these and change them to be anything you want. So change these shortcuts to allow you to get to where you want to go without needing to look at it. And they work really pretty well and in a straightforward manner. So you can cycle through these without really needing to bother to look at them too much while you're driving. Great! If you want to get some permanent buttons, Peugeot still feature these underneath here, but somewhat irritatingly, nothing for the heating and cooling. That still has to be done using the infotainment system, but they have at least left me with one thing I like, which is a standard volume knob. Hooray! USB-C charging and a 12-volt charging point in that storage area, and slightly further back, a pretty basic, straightforward plastic bit of cup storage. On the left-hand side, meanwhile, your gear selector and your drive mode selector. This car will always start in electric mode, but after that you can switch between hybrid, obviously that's the most efficient use of the system, or sports, in which it will always run the petrol engine to make sure you have the maximum power available to you. Slightly further back, another storage bin. This car, by the way, features 33 litres of available storage space. That's another USB-C charge port. So, comfortable space for another mobile phone. Let's see what the coupe roofline has done to the space in the back. Look at this legroom. Wow, I could play football in the back here. That said, this seat is set for me. Cornelius is well over 6 foot, so let's take a shuffle over to his side and see what realistic rear space is. Well, given that he is always more than generous with his own legroom in front, I still have acres of space back here. You'd expect that, especially if you've taken a look at the C5X. But coupe line headroom, well, I have a particularly long torso, so you can compare me seated to a guy of about 6'1", 6'2". And as you can see here, it's okay. I'm not going to get too sad about it because for relatively short distances, this is okay. But I would say, truthfully, if you have standard need to put passengers in the rear of over 6 feet, you might want to check that this is definitely going to work out for you. I mentioned in the intro how much I like this feature. It's not new, but I really never understand why more manufacturers do not put this on as standard. Anyone who's ever sat in a wet supermarket car park with a friend or family member coming out with a ton of shopping knows and loves this feature. Should be standard for everything. Now what you're looking at is 536 load space of room. If I fold these seats down, which I can do remotely from the back, that expands to 1,611 litres of load. Underneath, where you've got just enough space for charge cables there and a couple of odds bits and pieces, not much room besides that. Clearly the batteries take up a fair amount of additional space, but this to me really does just enough to give you all of the room and utility you need from such a vehicle, including another 12-volt charge point. While we're talking about well thought through features that every manufacturer should include, take a look at this. A simple, elegant solution to the parcel shelf which every coupe line and every fastback suffers from. What do you do with the parcel shelf when you open the rear? Well, look at this. It takes it completely out of your way. You don't even need to think about it. It's just gone. You have full access to the boot, but as soon as you shut it again, no obstruction to my rear view at all. Perfect. So at launch, this car only comes with a choice of 3 different powertrains, 2 hybrids and 1 petrol. The 2 hybrids are paired with a 1.6 litre PureTech petrol engine. That's going to produce either 150 or 180 horsepower depending on the size you go with, paired with an 81 kilowatt electric motor. That will give you a system output of either 180 or 220 horsepower. Those hybrid models come with a 12.4 kilowatt hour battery, quote, a 37 mile pure electric range. We'll have to wait and see if that's realistic for this car. This is where the charge point is located for the battery, and you have 3 different charging options for the 12.4 kilowatt hour battery. You can either go with a slow charge on a standard plug. That should take around about 7.5 hours. You can fast charge it at 1 hour and 40 minutes. That's if you use a 7.4 kilowatt charge. And there is an option in the middle where you can go for a reinforced standard charge point, and that should be around about halfway between the two. If you want the petrol model, that's a 1.2 litre producing 130 horsepower, 3-cylinder. I would have loved to have tried it to have seen if it could actually deliver for this car. But if you're interested in that, obviously for economic reasons, you might be advised to wait just a little bit, because quite soon into this lineup, that engine's going to be replaced with a newer model. This then is the most powerful of the hybrid engines that are available to use. But does it drive well? Let's take a closer look and find out. Well, we're just outside of Sitges, outside of Barcelona, and I wanted to start here because this car will always start in full electric mode. And I wanted you to listen, or rather not listen, to the noise that the car is making. Okay, it's full electric right now. Although we don't have any estimate on how many miles you can do full electric because the platform is so similar to the C5X, I think it's reasonable to say you should be able to expect around about 35 miles. And although that might not sound a lot, in practical use terms, the vast majority of your trips in any car are below that anyway, way below that, which means you should be able to get most of your to the shops and back done all without any need to worry about charge whatsoever. The second you set off in this car, you immediately feel the refinement of the drive, the handling, and especially that cabin noise and the delivery of the experience of this vehicle. It really is very pleasant to drive around slowly, which is a nice surprise for me. I would have expected it to have had a little bit more in the way of its size, making it feel a bit more bulky. But in keeping with the 308 and the 208, it feels surprisingly nimble around town. And despite the fact it's clearly a large car, it doesn't feel that way. And that's a really nice place to start from. So let's see what happens when I put my foot down. Well, a delay, and that's as the car switches up and gives me what it has, but we do have a drive mode selector. So if I slow down again, let's have a look and see what happens when I put it in sport. Okay, so now we're in sport mode. I'm going to really slow down to give myself the chance to put my foot down and see what happens. And here we go, foot flat to the floor, rolling start at 60. I think a bit too much delay before I get that power. I like the sound of the engine. I'm not in love with the sound of the engine. It sounds like it's working too hard. It's a 1.6. You've got an 81 kilowatt electric motor in this thing, and it gives you a combined system output of 220 horsepower. It just sounds like it's working a bit too hard. So if you're interested in sporty driving, right off the bat, I'm going to say not the car for you. What this car should deliver is refinement, and it does that. Once you put it on the open road, it feels comfortable, confident, and assured. The interaction with the road is really great. It's very, very comfortable to drive around in. And one of my favorite features actually of all new Peugeots is the handling. It's taut, responsive, and tight. It's really a pleasure to drive. But that's only as long as you don't want to drive it in a sporty way. Because, as I can demonstrate again, if I put it into sport mode, and the mode switch is not particularly satisfying. Okay, let's slow down a little bit and give it another stab. It's not that it's bad, it just sounds unconvincing. I don't understand why that engine is having to work so hard to deliver so little power to me. But in any case, it doesn't make me feel great. So back in hybrid it goes, the whine of the engine instantly disappears, and I'm comfortably cruising along here at 90 kilometers per hour. So I think that's a reasonable take. I will be really interested to see how the pure electric version handles when that comes out. You should get much more power in a much more responsive way. And the feeling that you get from the design and the interior and the seating experience of this car is all so good. It's a little bit disappointing that you're not quite getting the driving performance that you would want ideally. So I'm very excited to see what that can deliver. Well, we knew that the car was going to handle pretty comfortably on the highway, but in order to put it properly through its paces, we've come to the hills outside of Barcelona. We're more than a bit familiar with these roads. There are some really great inclines and some really great bends just to test out how well this car handles. Well, interestingly, the first thing you notice is that refinement and road noise that was so prevalent and exciting on the highway continues here on back roads as well. These are not the best finished roads I've ever driven on, but the road noise is still great, and that crisp responsive handling stays just as crisp and responsive once you start challenging the car a little bit. The car really isn't that heavy. The advantage of having these smaller electric batteries is that they don't add too much weight and have too much impact on the car's actual handling and performance. So as long as you're not putting it through too much of a challenge, the handling is actually really fun on this car. Biggest disappointment so far? The brakes. They're okay. They just don't match the sporty and responsiveness of the steering. The drive in this car is really fantastic. For the profile of car and the fact it's a hybrid, it's a lot of fun to drive. But the brakes just don't quite deliver what you want. They're not crisp, they're not responsive, and they're just a bit on the spongy side. But a lot of that can be taken into account by just getting used to the car and seeing what you can achieve with it. And a really important point to mention, the seats are great. The same ones they equip the 308, the 208 with. I loved them when I experienced them then. I still love them now. Okay, everybody has a different body. These are perfect for me. Downsides, this infotainment system. Come on, Peugeot, what are you thinking? Now, it might be a problem with my phone, but if it is, it's a problem I've never experienced in any other car. Android Auto cuts out on me every 20 to 30 seconds. At first, Cornelius thought he cracked it by saying it was a tunnel thing. When the phone loses signal, then it disconnects from the system automatically. Well, unless it keeps losing signal, that happens at least once every 3 minutes. And if you're using navigation as we were on Android Auto, that means you're going to miss your turn and get lost and very annoyed. And in Barcelona, that's just not working, because if you miss one turn, that can add half an hour to your journey time. So that's okay, right? You can just use Peugeot's onboard stuff. Surely that's okay. Yeah, you'd think so, but we're driving around a national park that I can assure you has been here for a long time, and according to our infotainment system, it does not exist. We are driving across a mountain right now, according to the system. So am I being picky and unfair? Yes, but that is kind of part of the job. In sum, really great handling, really fun, taut, responsive steering, really surprisingly lively for a car of this size and profile. Negatives, the brakes, I just don't love them. I tell you what else I don't love. As in keeping with all hybrids, there's a little bit of a stutter at the stop, and that shouldn't be there. This is not new technology, and it's very broadly applied. Watch as I do it again. It's just a little bit of an uncomfortable stutter right at the end. Now you're going to get more used to that the more you drive the car, but I just expect a bit more refinement. I've driven plenty of hybrids, and I have not experienced that in all of the hybrids I've driven, but you can't get these mixed powertrains without some compromise somewhere. It's just something you should be aware of if you're not used to driving one. That's all. Everything about this car, as a package though, is good. The only questions you need to ask yourself is, can I justify the amount of money? Do I need the additional space? And do I want something that's distinct and different but still fun to drive? If the answers to those questions are yes, I really think you should look at this. That said, if economy is your issue, I would definitely wait until the next version of the smaller petrol engine comes out. And if you want to get the most out of this car, forget that lag, forget the issue with the lack of performance, just wait until the pure electric one. Because I tell you what, that should take care of almost every single gripe I have. Well, with the exception of the Android Auto, but you know what? You can't win them all. Please go ahead and check out the review we did on the 308, take a look at that and see which car you think is the better buy. I'd love to hear from you.